So this is it, the final Whizbang's workshop card review. We got the remaining Death Knight cards here to look at today. You'll remember we saw a few of those earlier, including the hero card and some hand buff stuff. But today we got a new legendary Dr. Stitchin'. He is a 6-mana 6/4 undead. Battle Cry, discover a 5/3 and 1 cost minion to stitch to this, and then Death Rattle, summon the 5 cost minion. Now, what is unclear to me from this text, but you can see in the video, is that 5 cost minion will then summon the 3 cost minion on its Death Rattle, and the 3 cost minion will then summon the 1 cost minion as a Death Rattle. So basically, this is sort of a 4-part body where you get to pick the 3 bodies that come out of the end of the chain. And, you know, of course, theoretically, you're going to pick things that have big stats or hopefully positive effects, upsides, maybe even, you know, additional Death Rattles. So you might get even more than 4 bodies out of this single card. So this is ultimately like the pilotist shredder, the biggest shredder of all. It's just shredder on shredder on shredder. It's, I guess, kind of Rattlegore-esque in a way as well, but ultimately just a big old pile of stats. You know, if you just do really basic math and say, hey, a 5/5, a 3/3, maybe kind of a 2/2, let's say, for a 1-drop even, you're looking at, you know, 10/10 in stats on the Death Rattle total, 6/4 here to base, so it's 16/14 in stats on average or whatever, you know, something around that, which is, you know, it is big for a 6-drop, and it is, you know, somewhat hard to deal with, of course, all these different bodies over time. There are also, of course, some like Death Rattle synergies to keep in mind for perhaps this card, but also as we move into this video, stuff like Death's Growl, remember, is still in the Death Knight pool, and you get Yelling Yodeler as well for some like Death Rattle activations. I'm not convinced that'll feel especially good with Dr. Stitchin', but do keep those in mind as we move through the video. So for me, I mean, listen, this is definitely a pile of stuff. You know, corpse generation, bodies on board, all of those things can be useful for Death Knight plays. They have some wide board stuff in Unholy. You know, corpse generation can certainly fuel other sorts of things, but I think this is just a little bit too delayed in a lot of its payoffs. And frankly, like, you know, summoning a 3-drop and a 1-drop on turn like 7 or 8 or whatever it is, right? It just isn't going to go very far. And the front half of this body not having any sort of like immediacy, there's no taunt, there's no rush, there's none of that. I do think there are going to be a lot of instances you just kind of plop this down, you get mediocre results out of your discovers. Your opponent maybe just kind of ignores this for a while. Like, yeah, I don't really have an incentive to open this up because, you know, if I can't deal with like the 5-drop in particular, it's probably going to be about the same size on average. So, you know, maybe it just kind of lingers around, and that can be nice. You know, you start trading it in every turn, you have something to trade in, but ultimately it just doesn't really push a game plan very far forward. It doesn't necessarily offer you any kind of end game state or synergy bonuses that are driving towards a win condition. It just feels like a pile of stuff. And I don't know, sometimes these pile of stuff cards just don't get there unless the pile of stuff can be immediately threatening, like it's a big enough board that's so scary and so impactful right away that it's like, oh god, I have to deal with this or I'm just gonna die. Or it has, like we said, defense or immediacy via rush or something. So in like a standard constructed world, I don't know, man, this just doesn't seem like it does a lot to me. It's one of those cards that sure, it could make it into a Reno list because you need 30 cards, and especially as we're in a 4-set meta, fresh after rotation, you just need bodies, literal bodies to put in your deck. So, you know, this probably gets played sometimes in those sort of environments. It also doesn't have any rune requirements, which helps it find homes sometimes here and there. But ultimately, I think it's just going to be the bottom of your deck list at best. I don't see this as a reason to get super excited for a win condition or synergy. The Hearthstone decks these days are just so synergy driven, right? They're so synergistic. Does this fuel that? I don't really see it. Feels more like honest stats, old school, kind of arena vibes, more than modern day synergy Hearthstone vibes. So moving on here, we have Silk Stitching, another kind of Death Rattle package card. 2-mana spell, again, no runes. Choose a friendly minion, discover a spell that costs 4 or less for it to cast when it dies. So again, some death rattle synergies could be possible there where you like copy this effect or activate it early, those sorts of things. And do keep in mind that the spell is going to be like random when it casts. So if it's targeted, you know, it could target you sometimes when you don't want it to. It could be like damage that targets you, or it could be a buff that accidentally targets your opponent's minions. So there are some risks there. Of course, there are other spells that'll just kind of always work. If we look at the Death Knight spell pool, these are not all actually going to be in standard format. I think some of these will definitely be rotating, but you can kind of get a vibe. Stuff like Reap What You Sow, that's one of those where the deal 3 damage could whiff. It actually could hit you in the face, but maybe it's okay because you're excavating a treasure, so you're happy about it, right? Sometimes there could be upside. Stuff like, you know, Graveyard Shift, I have no idea if this is actually still in rotation or not, but yeah, okay, I'll just take a couple zombies with Reborn, right? That's just all upside. The hand buff stuff could be all upside. So some of these are just going to work. Asphyxiate, if that's still in, again, I don't know, it'll just work, right? So that's nice. That means you'll probably be able to pick one that has a generally useful or safe upside, or, you know, maybe if you're desperate, you have to take a flyer on some damage or something, or a removal that you desperately need and just hope that it works, that sort of thing. Or maybe you isolate your board where this is your only minion, so targeted stuff's going to hit opponent stuff anyway. So that's nice. That said, I still worry about the utility of this. It's just finding the right spell for the right moment. I don't think is going to be all that easy. There's such a, you know, mix and diversity of spell types in Death Knight. There's board-based stuff, hand-based stuff, damage-based stuff. Are you going to really align along what you need and find something that works in a pinch? And also feels worth the value, because it's not like discover one that costs 4, it's 4 or less. So sometimes you're going to get like a 1, a 1, and a 2, and it's like, oh man, I'm kind of spending 2 here to get a randomly targeted 2 mana spell that's maybe not worth it. And then you're kind of relying on the death rattle upsides to maybe make this better, but that just kind of magnifies any downsides or risks that the card has. So to me, I don't know, it looks a little awkward. I think this is going to feel clunky a lot of the time. And also, you're sometimes just giving the power to your opponent as well about how this resolves. I'm sure they'll be able to see the spell. So ultimately, again, kind of iffy on this. Now, this one I actually do like a lot. This is Threads of Despair. This is a single blood rune. Give all minions Death Rattle, deal 1 damage to all minions. And this is a shadow spell, and that's basically sort of Defile. As soon as the trigger goes off, of course, each thing that dies is going to trigger another 1 damage, and if that kills a minion, that's going to trigger another 1 damage. So this is sort of a Defile with some extra steps here, which Defile, as we know, has been one of the best removal cards in the history of Hearthstone within certain eras. And I think this could actually be really good too, particularly because Death Knight has access to their hero power, which means you can always kind of weave in a hero power 1/1, give it this death rattle. That can even kind of, since it can attack right away, help you set up some math a little bit better sometimes, even things out if you need to get some breakpoints for the Defile math to start setting. And just in case you didn't read this closely, give all minions means it's, you know, enemy minions too. You're not just giving your own minions, but you can also give your own minions as well to set up that Defile math as expected. So yeah, I think, you know, blood control decks could utilize that really well. They care about removal and this being, you know, so cheap. There's also something cool with this we can kind of set up for later. Like if you know, your opponent's got sort of a middling board now, but you think you want to kind of deal with it next turn or whatever. Set this up right now on just a couple minions, you know, then your sort of smaller removal next turn might be able to kind of trade up, you know, suddenly you have a 2 damage AoE that's dealing like 4 or 5 because it's activating your Threads of Despair on a future turn and sort of increasing your output later while still advancing it on the minions in play now. So you can kind of bank or invest some of that damage for later, which could be nice. So ultimately, yeah, this just looks like cool, efficient, fun removal. I actually really like the art on this a lot too. So next up here is the Dark Thorn Quilter, and this is finally the hand buff payoff I think we were looking for and hoping to see. We saw the Spellstone here, which, you know, potentially gives undead in your hand +3/+3. We saw the Puppeteer, which can give undead in your hand +2/+2, also with the mini version. And this, of course, being an undead and Quillbore means it can receive those buffs and actually becomes kind of crazy, right? You give this, 6/6 in stats, you give it 8/10 in stats, you're talking about a big damage output here potentially at the end of turn. You could even have a couple of these hands in hand and kind of use this as a lethal blow. I always talk about with these hand buff cards how it's sort of risky sometimes to just play stats for stats sake late in a game. Like, okay, I made big 7/7s and stuff or something, I'm playing them on turn 8. They don't always go that far. It's kind of late in the game for stats to do work. But with an effect like this, where you're turning those stats into immediate damage output, this can hit face. It's among all enemies, not just enemy minions. So, on an empty board, this becomes a lethal threat. This just chips away boards for removal, and it just becomes that really nice payoff potentially for a hand buff package that you'll probably need because you sacrificed a lot of tempo early to set up for those stats later. So, something pretty cool here. I actually don't know if this saves the hand buff package by itself, but it could. This is the kind of card that definitely feels like the standout piece of that synergy package. So next up here, we have the Rainbow Seamstress, a really cool support card for Rainbow Death Knight. A 3-mana 3/3 undead battle cry. If your deck started with a Blood, Frost, or Unholy card, gain Lifesteal, Reborn, or Rush, respectively. And respectively there means each of these corresponds to that rune type. So Blood and Lifesteal, Frost and Reborn, Unholy and Rush. So you could have any mix of these basically and gain one of those keywords. Of course, in Rainbow, you're going to get all three and have a Lifesteal, Reborn, Rush minion, which is pretty sick. Now, do keep in mind, because they are gaining these on the battle cry, the Reborn version will just be a vanilla 3/1. It will not also have Lifesteal and Rush because they won't have had the battle cry text to update it. That is confirmed, but that's also just how it reads. So the front half of this is going to be awesome. Take a trade with a 3/3, heal up a little bit, and then leave behind a 3/1 body. That 3/1 body, unfortunately, won't be able to trade in with Rush or anything, but still a nice little bonus, pile of stuff. And 2 cards in one with some immediate reactivity, with some healing potential. That's going to be a really nice little early game tool for Rainbow Death Knights. I think there's probably also some worlds where this makes sense in other rune combinations. I don't think, any single rune is probably worth it for this. Reborn, maybe. Rush, probably not. But, any pairing might be okay. I think the Rush paired with the other two in particular makes some sense on this as well. So could exist outside of Rainbow decks, but definitely really cool in that Rainbow world. Moving on here to the Shambling Zombie Tank, a 2-mana 3/2 undead mech with Taunt and Battle Cry. Spend 5 corpses to summon a copy of this. And this is actually kind of another hand buff support card. This is not something I think I'm ever very excited to play for a vanilla card, especially, it's not almost ever going to work on turn 2, maybe literally ever with corpses. I guess there's some stuff you could probably do with a coin to get 5 corpses on turn 1. But ultimately, this is something you're looking to play a little bit later in the game as a payoff probably for some of your hand buff cards. I could especially imagine this as a mid-game stopgap of sorts where you're not maybe fully done hand buffing, you're still trying to weave in some hand buffs, but you just need to stabilize a little bit on like turn 4, turn 5 or whatever. So, you play a hand buff card and you weave in the Shambling Zombie Tank, and maybe it's only got like 2/2 or something in that stage, but you're still looking at a 5/4 that's summoning a copy of itself for 2 mana, and that's a really efficient way to help you keep up. So this is a really nice little reward for hand buffs. The one thing I'll say is, in a hand buff deck, if you're spending a lot of time hand buffing and not spending a lot of time playing out minions, how readily available are 5 corpses going to be? It might be a little hard to get to that 5 corpse total without some kind of corpse generating effect, specifically just some little puzzle pieces to put together there from a deck building and kind of curve standpoint. Because if this does start to come down too late, it may not really matter how big it is necessarily. If it's coming down on turn 7 or 8, because that's where you finally kind of get the confluence of buffs and corpses necessary to activate all this and make it feel good. Taunt helps, that gives it some impact, but still kind of a sitting duck for removal sometimes. That said, efficiency could win out here because this is very cheap and copies can do pretty crazy, scary sorts of things. So I would still keep an eye on this one for that hand buff package. So next up here, we have the Rambunctious Stuffy, and a 3-mana 4/2 Undead Beast with Rush, and after you cast a Frost spell, gain Reborn. So the ability to bring this one back if you're playing it alongside some Frost spells. Do keep in mind that the 0 mana Frost spell Horn of Winter is new to the core set. That is going to still be around and playable this year. So, you know, that is a pretty cheap activator for this. There's some other, you know, 2 mana Frost spells and stuff in the mix as well. But also keep in mind, very importantly for this card, this reads on the base version of the card. So the Reborn one is going to come back, and it's still going to have this text. After you cast a Frost spell, gain Reborn, which means if you cast another Frost spell, you're going to get another Rambunctious Stuffy. Basically, every time you weave in a Frost spell after trading one of these off with Reborn, you can keep getting another one. So, I mean, if you have enough cheap Frost spells, you know, you can go infinite with this. As long as there's mana and Frost spells, you can keep resummoning Rambunctious Stuffies. Now, realistically, I think that's, you know, you're going to get maybe like 2 or 3 sometimes, just because you're going to run out of mana or cards before, you know, these go any further than that. But that could still offer the ability to like wipe up an opponent's board, trade in a 4/2, you know, cast a Frost spell, trade in a 4/2, cast a Frost spell. I think I already missed a Frost spell in the mix there, but you get the idea. Now that said, is that worth it? I don't know, man. I don't know. That feels like a pretty inefficient way sometimes to make all of this work as a kind of like board clear or removal. I don't know if that really feels like something I'm excited to do. I think more realistically, I probably just kind of want like Reborn minions sticking around as sort of threats on board. And, you know, maybe you're just happy to like see if it sticks for a turn and kind of hope to catch a couple bonuses off your Rambunctious Stuffy here and there, as opposed to like really building towards it or committing to it or whatever. So for that reason, I do think this is going to feel clunky sometimes, where you're just like, oh man, I really needed to play this on 3, but I don't have the Frost spell. And then it's like, oh, okay, it's fine. It's 4/2 with Rush. It's not a disaster or anything, but it feels like you feel kind of guilty about it almost. Number 1, because you're killing off such a cute little stuffed animal dog. But number 2, you're just not getting the kind of upside on this card. So maybe, you know, you feel better about it on turn 6 because you get a couple bodies instead of just one. But still, you know, you got to put this in your deck. It's got to occupy that slot. It's got to beat out other cards that could be doing things as well. So that makes me think there's a little bit too much work required to support this. Not to mention just like committing to a bunch of Frost spells and having those in hand is also some conditionality built into this too. So it's just got some hurdles to jump, which I wish it didn't. I wish it felt better and more exciting at a base. It's just fine at a base, I think, as a 4/2 Rush. So that said, let's do some quick reviews. Dr. Stitch and Sew is a 3-star card. Silk Stitching is a 2-star card. Threads of Despair is a 4-star card. Darkthorn Quilter is a 4-star card. Shambling Zombie Tank is a 3-star card. Rainbow Seamstress is a 4-star card. Rambunctious Stuffy is a 2-star card. And there you go. That's it. That's Whizbang's workshop. Man, I don't know. It's pretty fun ideas. I felt like the last couple reviews did drift downward a little bit from a power level standpoint, but we saw some crazy stuff, I think, in Shaman and in Priest in particular. And every set got something that's going to be really fun to play with as well. Although I don't think Death Knight looks like the strongest. I am excited to see if this hand buff package can finally kind of get there. Something that's been teased in Death Knight for a while now. So anyway, share your thoughts on these. Share your thoughts on the entire set of Whizbang's workshop cards. I'm actually going to be streaming Hearthstone next week for the theory crafting to try out some of these new cards and decks and stuff. And still plan to keep playing Hearthstone for new sets, as I have been the last couple sets as well. Probably not the entire 4-month period for a new expansion or whatever, but at least give it a few weeks after the release of the set here and mini set and so on. So stay tuned for more videos and all that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you again as always for joining me for this fun little review season, and thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.